You have to feel the aircraft, trust your instincts.
For 12 years, nobody in that small town knew the woman running the corner diner used to be one of the most decorated fighter pilots the Navy had ever produced. Maggie Coyle poured coffee, flipped eggs, and closed up shop every night at 8, and if anyone asked about her past, she'd smile and say she used to work in aviation, before changing the subject entirely. Then, one afternoon, a young Air Force officer walked in, ordered black coffee, and sat at the counter staring at a photograph on his phone. A grainy, decades-old image of a legendary maneuver almost nobody currently flying had ever actually seen executed successfully. "You look like you're carrying something heavy," Maggie said, refilling his cup. "I've got a pilot in my squadron," he said quietly. "Best natural talent I've ever trained, but she's about to attempt something in 3 days that's killed more pilots than it's saved, and I can't find a single living instructor who's actually pulled it off." Maggie went very still. "What maneuver?" He turned his phone toward her, showing the grainy photograph. She looked at it for a long moment, then looked up at him with an expression he'd never forget. "I taught that maneuver to 6 pilots 12 years ago," she said quietly. 5 of them are still flying today because of it." He stared at her, speechless, slowly putting together exactly who he'd just been talking to. Stick around, because what happens over the next 20 minutes of this story is one of the most emotional reversals we've ever told on this channel. And if you love stories about hidden pasts resurfacing exactly when the world needs them most, hit subscribe right now, because we post a new story exactly like this one every single week. 12 years ago, Commander Margaret Ghost Rider Coyle had been one of the most respected instructors in the Navy's Advanced Fighter Tactics program. A pilot whose reputation for teaching high-risk maneuvers safely had saved more lives than almost anyone in the program's history. Her specialty had been a maneuver so demanding, so unforgiving of even the smallest miscalculation, that most instructors refused to teach it at all, citing the fatality rate among pilots who'd attempted it without proper guidance. Maggie had developed a training method that made it survivable. Not easy, never easy, but survivable, in a way nobody else in the program had managed to replicate. Then, 12 years ago, a training accident unrelated to her own flying had taken the life of a close friend and fellow instructor, and something in Maggie had simply broken. She'd requested an early separation from service, walked away from a career most pilots would have killed for, and moved to a small town 3 states away where absolutely nobody knew her name or her record. She'd told herself she was done with cockpits, done with high-stakes training, done with watching young pilots put their lives in her hands. The diner had been an accident of circumstance more than a plan, an old building for sale in a town where nobody asked too many questions, exactly what she needed at the time. For 12 years it had worked. Nobody connected the quiet woman flipping eggs behind the counter to the legendary instructor whose name had once been spoken with genuine reverence throughout naval aviation circles. Until Captain Elias Marsh walked through her door carrying a problem she was uniquely equipped to solve. Elias Marsh hadn't come to that diner looking for anyone in particular. He'd simply stopped for coffee on a long drive back to base, exhausted and increasingly desperate after 2 weeks of dead ends trying to find any living instructor qualified to teach the maneuver his star pilot needed. "I don't understand," he said, still staring at Maggie. "You're telling me you taught this? The actual maneuver in this photo?" "I'm telling you I developed the training method in that photo," Maggie said quietly, setting down the coffee pot. "There's a difference. A lot of people attempted the raw maneuver before me. Most of them didn't walk away from it." "Then why haven't I ever heard your name? I've read every training document on this maneuver that still exists. Yours isn't in any of them. Because I asked for my name to be removed from the program records 12 years ago, she said. And because most of what I actually taught never made it into an official document. It wasn't something you could write down completely. It was something you had to feel your way through with someone standing next to you who'd already survived it. Elias sat back, processing this. My pilot attempts this in 3 days. She's the most talented flyer I've trained in 15 years, and she's also the only person in my squadron with the skill to even attempt it. If she fails... She won't just fail, Maggie said quietly. She won't come back. The diner went silent for a long moment. I need your help, Elias finally said. I know I have no right to ask this. I don't know what happened 12 years ago that made you walk away from all of this. But I have a 26-year-old pilot who's about to attempt something without proper guidance, and you're the only person alive who might actually be able to change that outcome. Maggie looked down at her hands for a long moment. If you love watching someone's past resurface exactly when it matters most, you're going to want to see what happens next. But first, go ahead and hit that subscribe button, because this channel is full of stories exactly like this one. Maggie didn't answer him that day. She told him she needed time, gave him a number where he could reach her, and watched him drive away with the same heaviness he'd walked in with. That night, alone in the small apartment above the diner, she pulled a dusty box out of a closet she hadn't opened in over a decade. Inside were photographs, training logs, and a folded flight suit she'd kept for reasons she'd never fully explained to herself. She thought about her friend, the one whose death had sent her running from all of it 12 years earlier. She thought about the 5 pilots she'd successfully trained, all of them still flying today because of methods she'd developed and refused to fully document, methods that had died with her decision to disappear. She thought about a 26-year-old pilot she'd never met, 3 days away from attempting something that could kill her without the guidance Maggie was uniquely capable of providing. The next morning, she called Elias Marsh before the diner even opened. I'll help, she said, but I need to meet her first, today if possible. 6 hours later, Maggie Coyle stood on a flight line for the first time in 12 years, meeting Lieutenant Sarah Kwan, the pilot whose life now depended on training methods Maggie had spent over a decade trying to forget. Captain Marsh says you're the only person who can teach me this, Sarah said, visibly nervous, clearly aware of the stakes. He's right, Maggie said, but I need you to understand something before we start. This maneuver has killed people, talented people. It's not going to be forgiving of shortcuts, and it's not going to be forgiving of fear you haven't dealt with. If you're not ready to be completely honest with me about both, we shouldn't do this at all. Sarah nodded, steady despite the nerves. I'm ready. Over the following 2 days, Maggie Coyle did something she genuinely believed she would never do again. She taught. She walked Sarah through every element of the maneuver with the same painstaking precision that had once made her the most respected instructor in the program, breaking down decades of hard-won knowledge into lessons a young pilot could actually absorb under pressure. She caught small hesitations in Sarah's technique that no other instructor would have noticed, corrections that made the difference between survival and catastrophe. On the second night, exhausted after hours in the simulator, Sarah finally asked the question that had been building since their first meeting. Why did you stop? 12 years of nobody knowing your name, running a diner in the middle of nowhere. You could have saved dozens more pilots in that time. Maggie was quiet for a long moment. I lost someone close to me, in an accident that had nothing to do with this maneuver, but it happened during a training cycle I was overseeing. I convinced myself that if I'd been paying closer attention, if I'd been a better instructor, it wouldn't have happened. I couldn't separate that guilt from the job anymore, so I left. Was it your fault? No, Maggie admitted. I know that now. I probably knew it then too, somewhere underneath the grief. But knowing something logically and being able to walk back into a cockpit are two very different things. Then why walk back in now? Maggie looked at her directly. Because I spent 12 years convincing myself that walking away meant nobody else got hurt on my watch. But the truth is, walking away just meant somebody else was going to be standing where I'm standing now, without the 12 years of experience I'd already earned. That's not protecting anyone, that's just hiding. 3 days later, Sarah Kwan executed the maneuver flawlessly, under conditions every bit as demanding as the training had prepared her for. Maggie Coyle watched from the command center, hands clenched, breathing shallow, 12 years of buried fear resurfacing in the span of 90 seconds. When Sarah's aircraft leveled out safely, the maneuver complete, the entire room erupted into celebration. Maggie simply closed her eyes and exhaled, 12 years of guilt finally beginning to loosen its grip. Afterward, Sarah found her outside the command center, still processing the adrenaline of the flight. I couldn't have done that without you, she said. Not just the training, the way you talked me through the fear. Nobody else could have done that. You did the flying, Maggie said. I just made sure you weren't doing it blind. Will you stay? Keep teaching? The program needs someone like you, now more than ever. Maggie thought about the diner, about the 12 quiet years she'd spent trying to disappear, about the version of herself that had genuinely believed hiding was the same thing as healing. I think, she said slowly, I've spent enough time flipping eggs for people who never knew what I used to be capable of. Maybe it's time I found out what I'm still capable of. Here's a question for you. If you were Maggie, 12 years removed from a painful past, would you have answered that call for help? Or would the guilt have kept you exactly where you were? Tell me your honest answer in the comments below. I want to know if you think running from something is ever actually the same as healing from it. If this story moved you the way it moved me while I was writing it, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button, because we post a brand new story just like this one every single week. Stories about people whose pasts catch up with them exactly when the world needs them most. Tap the notification bell too, so you never miss the next one. Thanks for watching all the way through. I'll see you in the next story.